You know that moment when someone you love completely destroys you in front of people who matter? When they take everything you've worked for and turn it into a joke for their entertainment? Well, that happened to me at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner. And let me tell you, what happened next changed everything. My name is Sarah, I'm 34 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I was wrong. Dead wrong. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly how my husband's cruel words at a family dinner led to me walking away with everything while he lost it all. But first, let me take you back to where this story really begins. 3 years ago, I was working as a freelance graphic designer, barely making ends meet. I had talent, sure, but I was struggling to find my footing in a competitive industry. My husband, Marcus, worked in finance. He had this steady, well-paying job at an investment firm, and honestly, he never let me forget it. "Don't worry, babe," he'd say whenever money was tight, "I've got us covered. You just keep playing with your little art projects." Little art projects. That's what he called my work. Even then, it stung, but I thought he was just being protective, you know? Like he didn't want me to stress about money while I was building my career. We'd been married for 5 years at that point, and I genuinely believed we were partners. We'd bought our house together. Well, technically, it was in both our names, but Marcus always acted like it was his house because he paid the mortgage. I contributed to utilities, groceries, everything else, but somehow my contributions never seemed to count. The house was beautiful, by the way. A 4-bedroom colonial in a great neighborhood, worth about $400,000. We'd gotten it for $320,000 3 years earlier, and I'd spent countless hours designing and decorating every room. I'd painted murals in the guest bedrooms, redesigned the entire kitchen layout, even created custom artwork for every wall. That house was as much my creation as it was our home. But Marcus's family? They saw me as the wife who didn't really work. His mother, Patricia, would make these little comments whenever we visited. "Oh, Sarah's still doing her computer thing." Or, "How nice that Marcus can support your hobbies, dear." His father, Robert, was even worse. He'd ask Marcus about work, about his achievements, his salary increases, his bonuses. Then he'd turn to me and say, "And how's the art stuff going?" With this patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. Marcus never defended me. Not once. He'd just smile and change the subject, like my career was this embarrassing family secret we all had to politely ignore. But here's what they didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, because he never bothered to really listen when I talked about my work. I was building something. Something big. It started small. I'd been doing freelance work for local businesses, designing logos, creating marketing materials, building websites. Word of mouth started spreading, and I began getting referrals from other cities, then other states. I was working 12-hour days, sometimes 14, building a client base and reputation. Then, about 18 months ago, I landed my first major corporate contract. A tech startup needed a complete brand overhaul, logo, website, marketing materials, everything. They paid me $25,000 for the project, more than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. I was so excited when I got that check. I remember running to Marcus when he got home from work, waving the check in the air like a lottery ticket. Look at this. My biggest contract ever." He glanced at it, smiled, and said, "That's great, honey. What's for dinner?" That should have been my first real warning sign. But I was too happy, too proud of my achievement to let his lukewarm response dampen my excitement. That contract led to 3 more. Then 5 more. Within 6 months, I was booked solid for the next year. I started turning down projects because I couldn't handle the volume. My little art projects were suddenly bringing in 6 figures annually. But did Marcus notice? Did his family acknowledge my success? Not even close. I remember one Sunday dinner at his parents' house, about 8 months ago. I'd just signed a contract with a Fortune 500 company, a 6-month project worth $80,000. I was practically glowing with pride, and I thought, finally, here's something that will make them take notice. Guess what? I announced during dessert. I just signed my biggest contract ever. A Fortune 500 company wants me to redesign their entire digital presence. Patricia looked up from her pie. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Marcus, tell us about that promotion you're up for. And just like that, the conversation moved on. Like I hadn't spoken at all. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. I thought it was supportive at the time, but looking back, I think he was trying to shut me up. He was embarrassed that I was trying to make my work sound important. That night, driving home, I tried to talk to him about it. Your family doesn't seem very interested in my career, I said carefully. They're just not creative types, he replied. They don't really understand what you do. It's not personal. But it felt personal. It felt like they saw me as this frivolous woman playing around on a computer, while their precious Marcus supported me like some kind of charity case. By the beginning of this year, I wasn't just successful. I was undeniably, obviously, can't be dismissed successful. I'd hired 2 employees. I'd rented office space. I had a waiting list of clients that stretched months into the future. My business, Sarah Designs Digital, was pulling in $300,000 annually. I was making more than Marcus. Significantly more. And I was smart about it. I started keeping detailed records of everything. Every contract, every payment, every business expense. I opened separate business accounts. I incorporated. I did everything by the book because I'd learned, working with so many businesses, how important proper documentation is. Marcus knew my business was doing well. He couldn't ignore the checks coming in, the new office, the employees I'd hired. But somehow, he still managed to diminish it. It's great that your hobby is paying off, he'd say to friends. Sarah's really found her niche with this computer stuff. Computer stuff. Like I was fixing viruses for neighbors instead of running a legitimate design agency. The breaking point should have come when I paid off my student loans, all $40,000 of them, in one lump sum. Marcus's reaction? Good, now you can contribute more to the household expenses. Contribute more? I was already paying for groceries, utilities, my car, all my personal expenses, and most of our entertainment costs. But because Marcus paid the mortgage, somehow I was still the one who needed to contribute more. I should have seen what was coming. I should have recognized that Marcus's ego couldn't handle my success. He'd built his identity around being the provider, the successful one, the one with the real job. My success threatened that identity, and threatened men don't usually respond well. But I was naive. I thought that if I just kept proving myself, kept achieving more, eventually his family would respect me. Eventually, Marcus would be proud to call himself my husband instead of my provider. I was so wrong. The dinner that changed everything happened on a Saturday night in March. Marcus's parents were celebrating their 35th wedding anniversary, and they'd invited the whole family to their country club for a formal dinner. I'd spent the entire week preparing for a major presentation, a potential client who could single-handedly double my business revenue. It was the biggest opportunity I'd ever had, and I'd been working 18-hour days to get the proposal perfect. But I still made time to shop for the perfect gift for Marcus's parents, get my hair done, buy a new dress. I wanted to look the part of the successful daughter-in-law I'd finally become. The dinner started normally enough. The usual small talk, the usual polite inquiries about work and life. Marcus was in a good mood. He'd just found out about a bonus at work, and he was basking in his father's approval. $15,000 bonus, Robert said, clapping Marcus on the back. That's my boy. Patricia, can you believe we raised such a successful son? I'm so proud, Patricia beamed. And Sarah, how lovely that you can enjoy the benefits of Marcus's hard work. I felt my smile falter slightly, but I kept my composure. Actually, I've been pretty busy with my own work lately. I just landed the biggest contract of my career. Oh, that's nice, dear, Patricia said dismissively. Marcus, tell us more about this bonus. Will you be investing it? This was the pattern. Every time I tried to share my achievements, the conversation somehow circled back to Marcus. But this time, I was determined to be heard. The contract I'm talking about, I continued, speaking a little louder, is worth $150,000. It's with a major tech company that wants me to handle all their digital branding for the next year. The table went quiet. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me. $150,000? Robert raised an eyebrow. For computer work. Design work, I corrected firmly.
Ir&A Digital Design Agency.
We handle branding, web development, digital marketing campaigns.
It's a full-service creative agency.
Marcus's brother, David, who'd been quiet up until this point, leaned forward. Wait, Sarah's making 6 figures doing graphic design? More than 6 figures, I said, and I'll admit, there was pride in my voice. This year, my business will gross over 400,000. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. Patricia looked confused, like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Robert's expression was unreadable. David looked genuinely impressed, which should have been encouraging, but I was watching Marcus's face, and what I saw there made my stomach drop. He looked angry. Not proud, not surprised, not happy for me. Angry. 400,000, Robert repeated slowly. And you're saying this is from designing things on a computer? Yes, I said, my confidence wavering slightly. I have 12 regular corporate clients, 2 full-time employees, and a waiting list that's booked through next year. Wow, David said. Sarah, I had no idea. That's incredible. It really is, his wife Jennifer added. I mean, that's more than most people make in traditional careers. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something supportive, something proud. Waiting for him to finally acknowledge what I'd accomplished. Instead, he laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not a proud laugh. A dismissive, cruel laugh that cut through me like a knife. Come on, he said, still chuckling. Sarah's being a little dramatic about her arts and crafts business. Arts and crafts business. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd worked for, everything I'd achieved, that's how he saw it. That's how he'd always seen it. But he wasn't done. I mean, it's cute that she's making some money with her little hobby, he continued, speaking to the table like I wasn't sitting right there. But let's be realistic here. She's not running IBM. She's making pretty pictures on a computer and charging people way too much for it. The laughter around the table was forced, uncomfortable. Even Patricia looked a little embarrassed by Marcus's tone. But Marcus was on a roll now, feeding off what he thought was the family's amusement. Next she'll be telling us she's a CEO, he said, grinning at his own wit. CEO of coloring inside the lines. That's when something inside me broke. Not broke like shattered, broke like snapped. Like a chain that had been holding me back suddenly gave way. I stood up slowly, my hands remarkably steady as I placed my napkin on the table. You're right, Marcus, I said, my voice calm and clear.
I'm not running IBM.
I'm running a business that makes more money than you do, with clients who respect my expertise and value my work. But you're absolutely right about one thing. I am being dramatic. The table had gone completely silent now. Even the server who'd been approaching our table had stopped in her tracks. I'm being dramatic by staying married to a man who's so threatened by my success that he has to humiliate me in front of his family to feel better about himself. Marcus's face had gone red. Sarah, don't be ridiculous. I was just joking. No, I cut him off. You weren't joking. You were doing what you always do. Making sure everyone knows that my work isn't real, isn't important, isn't worth acknowledging. Well, congratulations, Marcus. You finally made your point crystal clear. I picked up my purse and looked around the table one last time. Thank you for dinner, I said to Patricia and Robert. And congratulations on 35 years of marriage. I hope you understand why I won't be celebrating any more anniversaries with this family.
And 10 I walked out. Just like that.
Left my husband sitting at that table with his family, probably trying to explain why his wife had just publicly announced the end of their marriage. The drive home was surreal. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing was calm, but my mind was racing. Had I really just done that? Had I really just walked out of my marriage in front of Marcus's entire family? Yes. Yes, I had. And for the first time in years, I felt free. By the time I got home, Marcus was already there. He'd apparently left right after me, which meant the family dinner had ended pretty abruptly. Good. What the hell was that? he demanded as soon as I walked through the door. That, I said, setting my purse down carefully, was me finally standing up for myself. You embarrassed me in front of my entire family. The irony of that statement was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I embarrassed you? I turned to face him. Marcus, you just called my successful business arts and crafts in front of people whose respect I've been trying to earn for 5 years. You turned my biggest professional achievement into a joke for your entertainment. But I embarrassed you. You're overreacting, he said, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I was just teasing. Everyone knows I support your work. Do they? Because what they just heard was you mocking your wife's career, which happens to be more successful than yours, in order to get a few laughs from Daddy. That hit home. Marcus's face darkened. More successful? Sarah, you play around on a computer. I work in finance. I have a real job with real responsibilities. I employ 2 people, Marcus. I have clients who depend on me for their business success. I pay taxes on 6 figures of income. But sure, it's not real because it's creative. We argued for another hour, going in circles. Marcus kept insisting I was overreacting, that he'd just been joking, that I was being too sensitive. I kept trying to explain that this wasn't about one comment. It was about 5 years of dismissal, of being treated like my work didn't matter, of being patronized and diminished at every turn. Finally, exhausted, I said the words that ended it. I want a divorce. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, staring at me like I'd just told him I was from Mars. You want a what? A divorce. I'm done, Marcus. I'm done pretending that this marriage is working when you clearly don't respect me or anything I do. You can't be serious. Over one comment at dinner. Over 5 years of comments. Over 5 years of you treating my career like a cute hobby. Over 5 years of your family treating me like I'm lucky to be supported by their precious son, when the truth is, I haven't needed your support for 2 years. That's when the real fight started. Marcus went from dismissive to desperate to angry to cruel in the span of about 10 minutes. Fine, he finally spat. You want a divorce? Good luck affording this house on your arts and crafts income. And that, right there, was his biggest mistake. Here's what Marcus didn't know, what he'd never bothered to learn because he was too busy dismissing my computer stuff. I'd been working with business lawyers for 2 years. When you run a successful company, you need legal advice on contracts, employment law, intellectual property, all sorts of things. My lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, had become a friend as well as a legal advisor. She'd watched my business grow, helped me structure it properly, advised me on everything from incorporation to employee benefits. When I called her Monday morning and told her I needed a divorce attorney, she didn't ask questions. She just said, I know someone perfect. Can you meet with her today? By Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Margaret Chen, one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state. I brought everything, 5 years of tax returns, business records, bank statements, property documents, everything. Margaret reviewed my files for about an hour while I sat there, nervously drinking coffee and wondering if I was making a huge mistake. Finally, she looked up at me and smiled. Mrs. Davidson, she said, I have to ask, does your husband have any idea what your financial situation actually is? What do you mean? I mean, based on these documents, you've been the primary earner in your household for the past 18 months. Your business income has exceeded his salary by a significant margin, and you've been contributing more to the household expenses than he has, when you factor in all the payments you've been making. But he pays the mortgage. Yes, but you've been paying for renovations, improvements, utilities, groceries, entertainment, your car, and you've been putting money into a joint savings account that you've both been drawing from. When I add it all up, you've actually been contributing about 60% of the household expenses. My head was spinning. But the house is in both our names. Yes, and that works in your favor. In this state, marital property is divided equitably, which doesn't necessarily mean equally. Given that you've been the higher earner and the larger contributor to household expenses, and given that you can demonstrate the income to maintain the mortgage payments, you have a strong case for keeping the house. I can keep the house? Mrs. Davidson, based on what I'm seeing here, not only can you keep the house, but your husband might end up owing you money. You've been essentially subsidizing his lifestyle while he's been treating you like you're dependent on him. That meeting changed everything. For 5 years, I'd been letting Marcus and his family treat me like I was the lucky recipient of his financial generosity, when the reality was the exact opposite. I'd been so focused on gaining their respect that I'd never stopped to do the math. I'd never realized that my little hobby had not only become self-sustaining, but had actually become the financial foundation of our marriage. Margaret filed the divorce papers that Friday. Marcus was served at his office on Monday morning. The call came at 2:30 p.m. on Monday. I was in a client meeting when my phone rang, but I could see it was Marcus, and he'd already called 6 times since morning. "I need to take this," I told my client, stepping out of the conference room. "What the hell, Sarah?" Marcus's voice was shaking with rage. "Divorce papers? Seriously? I get served at work like some kind of criminal." "I told you I wanted a divorce," I said calmly. "I'm following through." "This is insane. You're throwing away 5 years of marriage over one stupid comment." "Marcus, we've had this conversation. This isn't about one comment." Fine. I'm sorry about what I said at dinner. I was out of line. Can we please just talk about this like adults?" For a moment, I almost wavered. He sounded genuinely remorseful, genuinely scared. But then I remembered sitting at that dinner table, feeling like I was shrinking into nothing while he got laughs at my expense. "We tried talking, Marcus. 4 years. It didn't work." "But Sarah, be realistic here. You can't afford this house on your own. And your business. I mean, what if it doesn't last? What if this is just a good year? You need stability." There it was again. The assumption that my success was temporary, that my business wasn't real, that I needed him for stability. "Marcus," I said, and I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice, "you should probably read those divorce papers more carefully. Specifically, the part about asset division." There was a long pause. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I make more money than you do. I'm talking about the fact that I can afford the house payments, and according to my lawyer, I have a strong case for keeping it." "That's ridiculous. It's my house. I've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. It's our house, Marcus. Both our names are on the deed. And I've been paying for everything else, renovations, improvements, utilities, groceries. When you add it all up, I've actually contributed more to this household than you have." Another long pause. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he tried to process this information. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to start looking for somewhere else to live. My lawyer says I can probably get a court order for you to move out within the next 2 weeks. Sarah, please. Let's just sit down and talk about this. We can work it out."
No, Marcus.
"We can't. You made it very clear at that dinner how you see me and my work. You can't unsay those words, and I can't go back to pretending they don't matter." That night, Marcus came home with flowers and takeout from my favorite restaurant. He'd clearly been thinking about our conversation all afternoon, probably running the numbers himself and realizing that his dismissive wife wasn't quite as dependent as he'd thought. "Sarah, honey, I brought dinner. Can we please talk?" I was working in my home office, the room I'd converted from our guest bedroom into my workspace. I'd been on video calls all day with clients, managing projects, reviewing proposals, doing all the things that Marcus had reduced to arts and crafts. "I'm busy," I said without looking up from my computer. "Please. Just give me 5 minutes." I saved my work and turned around. Marcus was standing in the doorway with this pathetic, desperate expression that I'd never seen before. "You really make $400,000 a year?" he asked quietly. "This year I'll probably hit closer to 500,000. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. "I had no idea." "Because you never asked. You never listened. You just assumed that because my work is creative, it's not valuable."
I'm sorry.
"I'm really, truly sorry." "I know you are, Marcus. But sorry doesn't fix 5 years of feeling invisible in my own marriage. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Margaret was right. I kept the house, along with my business, my savings and my self-respect. Marcus kept his retirement account, his car, and a healthy dose of humility. The settlement hearing was almost anticlimactic. Marcus's lawyer had clearly explained the financial realities to him, because he didn't fight for the house or demand alimony or any of the other things he'd threatened during our nastier arguments. Marcus himself looked smaller somehow, sitting across from me in that courtroom. Diminished. Like he'd finally realized what he'd lost and what it was actually worth. After the judge signed the papers, Marcus caught up with me in the hallway. "Sarah, I just want you to know. I really am sorry. I know I screwed up." "I know," I said. And I meant it. I could see in his eyes that he finally understood what he'd done, what he'd thrown away. "Do you think maybe someday we could try again? Maybe I could prove that I've changed." I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd loved for so many years, who'd made me feel so small for so long. "Marcus," I said gently, "I hope you do change. I hope you find someone who makes you happy, and I hope you never make her feel the way you made me feel. But that someone isn't going to be me." 6 months later, I'm writing this story from my home office, the same room where I had that last conversation with Marcus as my husband. My business is thriving, I've hired 2 more employees, and I just signed a contract that will take me well into next year. The house is exactly the same, but it feels completely different. It feels like mine now, in a way it never did when I was sharing it with someone who saw my success as a threat instead of something to celebrate. Sometimes I run into people from Marcus's family around town. They're always polite, always ask how I'm doing. Patricia even stopped me at the grocery store last month to tell me she'd heard about my business expanding, and she seemed genuinely impressed. "I had no idea you were so successful, dear," she said. "Marcus never really explained what you did." "No," I thought. "He never did. But that's his loss, not mine. Because now, finally, I'm surrounded by people who see my work for what it really is. Not arts and crafts, not a cute hobby, but a legitimate, successful business built by someone who refused to stay small just to make others comfortable. And you know what? That feels pretty good. If you're in a relationship where someone is diminishing your achievements, minimizing your worth, or treating your success like it's somehow threatening to them, please listen to me, you deserve better. You deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. You deserve to be built up, not torn down. And sometimes, walking away from someone who can't see your value is the only way to fully see it yourself. Trust me on this one. But let me back up even further, because there's more to this story that I think you need to understand. The patterns that led to that horrible dinner didn't start with my business success. They started from day one of our relationship. I met Marcus in college. I was an art major, he was studying business. Even then, there were signs I should have noticed. When people asked what we were studying, Marcus would say, "I'm in business, and Sarah's doing art," with this tone that made it sound like I was majoring in finger painting. His friends would joke about how I'd probably end up as a starving artist, and Marcus would laugh along instead of defending me. Even when I graduated summa cum laude and he barely scraped by with a C average, somehow his degree was still the practical one. When we got engaged, his mother actually asked me if I planned to give up the art thing once we were married. Like creativity was some kind of phase I'd grow out of, like a rebellious teenager dyeing their hair purple. "Oh no," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "I'm planning to build a career in design." Patricia looked confused. "But Marcus will be able to support you. You won't need to work." That conversation haunted me for years. The assumption that my work was optional, something I did to pass time until my husband could afford to keep me as a decorative housewife. Marcus never corrected these assumptions. Not when his family made them, not when his friends made them, not even when strangers made them. He just smiled and let people believe that he was the breadwinner and I was the lucky woman he'd chosen to support. The worst part was how it affected my own confidence. When everyone around you treats your dreams like hobbies, you start to doubt yourself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being unrealistic thinking I could make a living as a designer. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I took whatever freelance work I could get, mostly small local jobs that paid barely enough to cover my car payment. Marcus would come home from his entry-level finance job and ask how my projects were going, like I was working on scrapbooks instead of building a business. When I'd get excited about a new client or a project I was proud of, Marcus would listen with this indulgent smile, like a parent listening to their child talk about their imaginary friend. Supportive on the surface, but fundamentally dismissive underneath. The first time I made more money than Marcus in a single month, I thought everything would change. It was about 3 years into our marriage, and I'd just completed a major project for a regional restaurant chain, new logos, menu designs, signage, the works. The check was for $12,000, which was more than Marcus's monthly salary at the time. I was so proud. I'd worked for 6 weeks straight, barely sleeping, perfecting every detail. When that check arrived, I felt like I'd finally proven that my work was legitimate, valuable, worth taking seriously. I planned this whole evening around showing Marcus. I cooked his favorite dinner, opened a bottle of champagne, even printed out the contract and the check stub to show him the numbers.
Guess what?
I said as we sat down to eat. Remember that restaurant project I've been working on? Look at this. I slid the check across the table with a huge grin on my face, waiting for his reaction. Marcus picked up the check, looked at it, and whistled.
12.000?
Wow, that's great, honey. It's more than you made this month, I said, laughing with excitement. That's when his expression changed. Just slightly, but I caught it. This flicker of something, annoyance?
Embarrassment?
Across his face before he composed himself again. Well, he said, setting the check down, that's a nice bonus.
Good for you.
A bonus. He called my biggest professional achievement to date a bonus, like it was some kind of unexpected windfall instead of the result of weeks of intensive work.
It's not a bonus, Marcus.
It's payment for a major project.
This is my biggest client yet.
Right, of course. I just meant, it's not like you can count on this kind of money regularly. And there it was. The assumption that my success was temporary, accidental, not something I could sustain or build on. That night, lying in bed, I tried to talk to him about it. I felt like you weren't very excited about my check today. What? No, I was excited. It's great that your hobby is paying off.
It's not a hobby, Marcus.
It's my career. Okay, career. I'm sorry. I am proud of you, Sarah. It's just, you have to admit, design work is pretty unpredictable. 1 month you make 12,000, next month you might make nothing. He wasn't wrong about the unpredictability, but the way he said it made it sound like my work was inherently less valuable because it wasn't a traditional salary. Your work is unpredictable too, I pointed out.
You could get light of tomorrow.
That's different. I work for an established company. I have benefits, job security, a career track. What you do is more like gig work. Gig work. Like I was driving for Uber instead of building a professional design practice. That conversation set the tone for the next 2 years. No matter how much my business grew, no matter how many clients I gained or how much money I made, Marcus always found a way to frame it as temporary, risky, less legitimate than his traditional job. By year 4 of our marriage, I'd learned to keep my professional wins to myself. It was easier than dealing with Marcus's backhanded compliments and subtle put-downs. When I landed my first $50,000 contract, I didn't tell him until the check cleared. When I hired my first employee, I presented it as getting some help with overflow work, instead of expanding my business. When I rented office space, I called it a place to meet clients, instead of headquarters for my growing company. I started compartmentalizing my life in a way that seems insane to me now. At work, I was Sarah, the successful business owner, the creative director, the boss. At home, I was Sarah, the wife with the computer job that paid for groceries and utilities while her husband handled the real expenses. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I'd spend my days in meetings with CEOs and marketing directors, making decisions that affected entire companies' public images, then come home and listen to Marcus explain basic financial concepts to me like I was a child. Maybe you should think about setting up a retirement account, he said one evening, after I'd mentioned that my business was having a particularly good quarter. I have 3 retirement accounts, Marcus. I maxed out my SEP-IRA contribution last year. He looked surprised. You did? How much did you contribute?
55,000.
$55,000? Into retirement?
Yes, Markus.
When you make good money, you can afford to save for the future. He was quiet for a moment, processing this information. I had no idea you were making that much. Because you never ask. You never want to hear the details when I talk about work. I do too ask about your work. You ask if I'm staying busy, or if my projects are going well. You never ask about revenue or client retention, or business strategy, or any of the things you'd ask about if you thought my work was real. That's not true. But it was true, and we both knew it. Markus asked about my work the way you'd ask about someone's garden or their book club. Polite interest in a harmless pastime, not genuine curiosity about a professional endeavor. The breaking point almost came that Christmas, when we were visiting his family. Marcus's cousin James was there with his new girlfriend, a lawyer who'd just made partner at her firm. Congratulations, Michelle, Patricia said over dinner. Partner at 32. That's incredible. Thank you, Michelle replied. It's been a long road, but I love what I do. And such important work, Robert added. The law is a noble profession. I sat there listening to them celebrate Michelle's career, which, don't get me wrong, was impressive, and I thought about my own achievements. I was 31 years old, running a business that employed 4 people and generated more revenue than most law practices. But nobody at that table even knew what I did for a living. Sarah, Michelle said, turning to me, Markus mentioned you work in design? That must be so creative and fulfilling. It is, I said. I run a digital marketing agency. We handle branding and web development for corporate clients. Oh, how interesting. What kind of companies? Finally, someone was asking the right questions. I started telling Michelle about some of my major clients, the tech startups, the Fortune 500 company, the international brands I'd worked with. As I talked, I noticed Markus getting more and more uncomfortable. He kept trying to change the subject, making little jokes about my computer wizardry and artistic temperament. But Michelle was genuinely interested, asking smart questions about my business model, my growth strategy, my plans for expansion. For 20 minutes, I got to talk about my work with someone who understood that running a successful business is complex and challenging and worthy of respect. You know, Michelle said finally, my firm is looking for a new marketing agency. Would you be interested in pitching for our account? I nearly choked on my wine. Your firm? Patterson, Williams and Associates. You know us. You're one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. Of course I know you. Well, we're not happy with our current marketing company. If you're interested, I could set up a meeting. That meeting led to a $75,000 annual contract. Michelle's law firm became one of my anchor clients, providing steady, high-value work that allowed me to be more selective about other projects. But when I told Markus about it, his response was, "That's great, honey. I'm glad Michelle could throw some work your way." Throw some work my way. Like it was a favor instead of a competitive business win. The year leading up to that disastrous dinner was the most successful of my career, and the most frustrating of my marriage. Every professional milestone felt hollow because I couldn't share it with the person who was supposed to be my partner. When I was featured in a major design magazine as one of 30 under 30 creative entrepreneurs to watch, Markus glanced at the article and said, "Cool, you're famous now." When I spoke at a digital marketing conference in front of 500 people, Markus asked if I'd gotten paid for it, and when I said yes, he said, "Nice little speaking fee." It was a $10,000 speaking fee, plus travel expenses. But to Markus, everything I did was little or nice or cute. Diminutive words that made my achievements sound trivial. The worst incident happened about 2 months before the anniversary dinner. I'd been invited to participate in a panel discussion about women entrepreneurs for a local business organization. It was being held at the same country club where Marcus's parents would later host their anniversary dinner. I was excited about the panel. It was a chance to talk about my journey, maybe inspire other women who were starting their own businesses. I asked Markus if he wanted to attend. A business panel? I don't know, Sarah. That sounds pretty boring. It's not boring. It's about entrepreneurship, about building successful companies. You might actually learn something. From you, he said, and then caught himself. I mean, from the panel. Sure, I guess I could come. The night of the panel, Marcus showed up late, just as I was being introduced. I saw him slip into the back of the room as I started talking about the early days of my business, the challenges I'd faced, the strategies that had led to my success. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about scaling a creative business, managing employees, balancing creativity with profitability. I felt confident, articulate, in my element. After the panel, several people came up to congratulate me, to ask for my business card, to discuss potential collaborations. I was networking, doing what successful business owners do. Marcus waited by the bar, checking his phone. On the drive home, I was still buzzing with excitement. That went really well, I said. I think I might get some new clients out of it. Marcus replied, not looking up from his phone. Did you hear any of it? The part where I talked about our growth strategy? Yeah, it was fine. Fine. My professional presentation, my expertise being recognized by my peers, was fine. Just fine. Marcus sighed and put his phone away. Sarah, I don't really understand all the business stuff you talk about. It's not my area. But you work in business, Marcus. You're in finance. Surely you understand concepts like revenue growth and client retention. That's different. What you do is more creative. It's not the same as real business. There it was again. Real business. As if what I did was make-believe, playing dress-up in the world of actual professionals. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out when my husband had become someone who couldn't celebrate my success. When had his insecurity become more important than my achievements? I thought about the early days of our relationship, when he used to brag about his talented girlfriend to his friends. When had that pride turned into embarrassment? The answer, I realized, was when my talent started translating into success that exceeded his own. The month before the anniversary dinner, something happened that should have been the final wake-up call for both of us, but instead it just made everything worse. Marcus got passed over for a promotion he'd been expecting. He'd been certain he was going to be made senior analyst, with a significant salary increase and better benefits. Instead, they gave the position to someone younger, someone who'd been with the company for less time but had an MBA from a more prestigious school. Marcus was devastated. He came home that Friday night looking like someone had died. I didn't get it, he said, slumping into a chair at the kitchen table. Oh, Marcus, I'm so sorry. And I was. Despite everything, I still loved him, still wanted him to succeed. 5 years, he said. 5 years I've been busting my ass for that company, and they give my job to some kid with a fancy degree. It's not your job yet. There will be other opportunities. Will there? I'm 34 years old, Sarah. If I haven't made senior analyst by now, maybe I never will. I sat down across from him, trying to find the right words. Your career isn't over because of one setback. You're talented, you work hard. Do I? He interrupted. Because apparently I don't work hard enough. Apparently I'm not good enough. It broke my heart to see him like this. For all his flaws, for all the ways he'd diminished my success, I didn't want him to feel like a failure. Marcus, you are good enough. This is about office politics, not your abilities. Easy for you to say. You're killing it with your business. Everything you touch turns to gold. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. It wasn't just disappointment about the promotion. It was resentment. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. God, Sarah, how did this happen? How did you become the successful one while I'm stuck in the same dead-end job I had 5 years ago? The question hung in the air between us. How had this happened? How had the wife with the little art projects become more professionally accomplished than her husband with the real job? Marcus, I said carefully, success isn't a competition. We're supposed to be on the same team. Are we? Because it doesn't feel like it anymore. It feels like you're winning and I'm losing, and everyone can see it. Who's everyone? My parents. My friends. People at work who know about your business. Everyone knows that my wife makes more money than I do. And there it was. The real issue. Not that he wasn't successful, but that I was more successful. Not that he was failing, but that I was winning. So this is about money? It's not about money. It's about, I don't know, respect. Being able to feel like a man in my own marriage. What does that even mean, Marcus? How does my success make you less of a man? You wouldn't understand. Try me. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When we got married, I thought I knew how things would go. I'd be the provider, you'd do your art thing, maybe make a little money on the side. I'd take care of the big expenses, you'd handle the household stuff. Traditional, but it worked for my parents. But it didn't work out that way. No, it didn't. And now I feel like I'm useless. Like you don't need me for anything. The vulnerability in his voice almost broke me. For a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, insecure and struggling and asking for help. Marcus, I'll always need you. Not for money, but for partnership. For love. For being my husband. But that's not enough, is it? If you don't need me financially, if you're more successful than I am, what do I bring to this marriage? It was a heartbreaking question, and I didn't have a good answer. Because the truth was, I had been growing apart from him. Not because of money, but because of how he'd responded to my success. His inability to celebrate my achievements had created a distance between us that I didn't know how to bridge. You bring yourself, I said finally. The person I married. The person I love. But even as I said it, I wondered if I still did love that person, or if I'd just been holding onto the memory of who he used to be. That conversation should have been a turning point. It should have been the moment when Marcus realized that his insecurity was damaging our marriage, and when I realized how much pain he was in. Instead, it made everything worse. Because now Marcus knew that I knew how he felt. He knew that I could see his resentment, his jealousy, his wounded pride. And instead of addressing those feelings constructively, he started lashing out more. The comments about my computer stuff got more frequent and more cutting. The dismissive attitude toward my clients and my work became more pronounced. It was like he'd decided that if he couldn't be more successful than me, he could at least make sure I knew that my success didn't count. The 3 weeks between that conversation and the anniversary dinner were the worst of our marriage. Marcus seemed determined to prove that my business wasn't as important as his job, even though his job had just confirmed that he wasn't as important as he'd thought. He started nitpicking everything about my work schedule. If I had an evening call with a client in a different time zone, he'd complain that I was always working. If I had to travel for a project, he'd make snide comments about how nice it must be to take business trips on someone else's dime. When I hired my 4th employee, he said, "Pretty soon you'll have more people working for you than you know what to do with." When I signed a contract with a major retail chain, he said, "I hope you're not overextending yourself. It's easy to bite off more than you can chew." Every achievement was met with a warning or a criticism or a subtle suggestion that I was getting in over my head. The worst part was how he started treating me in front of other people. At a friend's birthday party, when someone asked what I did for work, Marcus jumped in before I could answer.
Sarah runs a little design business.
She makes websites and stuff. Actually, I corrected, I run a full-service digital marketing agency. We handle branding, web development, and digital strategy for corporate clients. Right, Marcus said with a laugh. She makes it sound very fancy. At a work happy hour, Marcus's work happy hour, one of his colleagues mentioned that he'd heard I was some kind of entrepreneur. "Oh, Sarah's very entrepreneurial," Marcus said. "She's always got some project going." Some project. Like I was a hobbyist with a craft room instead of a business owner with employees and clients and revenues. But the absolute worst incident happened the week before the anniversary dinner. Marcus's company was having their annual awards ceremony, and spouses were invited. I bought a new dress, got my hair done, the whole thing. I wanted to look the part of the successful executive's wife, even though by this point, I was the more successful executive. At the cocktail hour before the ceremony, I was talking to the wife of one of Marcus's colleagues, a woman named Janet whose husband worked in the same department. "Marcus tells me you're in graphic design," she said. "I own a digital marketing agency, actually. We work with a lot of corporate clients on branding and web development." "Oh, how interesting. That must be such a fun creative outlet." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my elbow. "Sarah's being modest," he said. "She basically makes pretty pictures on a computer."
Pretty pictures on a computer.
Janet looked confused, glancing between Marcus and me like she wasn't sure if he was joking. "Actually," I said, my voice carefully controlled, "I run a business that employs 6 people and generates significant revenue. It's a bit more complex than making pretty pictures."
Markus Laukhet.
Sarah takes her hobby very seriously. That was it. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over. Standing in that hotel ballroom, listening to my husband reduce everything I'd worked for to a hobby that made pretty pictures, I felt something die inside me. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, but really I just needed to get away from Marcus before I said something I couldn't take back. I stood in the bathroom mirror, looking at myself in my new dress with my professionally styled hair, and I realized I was done. I was done making excuses for his behavior. Done pretending that his insecurity was my problem to solve. Done shrinking myself to make him feel bigger. When I came back to the cocktail hour, Marcus was telling someone else about my little computer business. I walked up, smiled politely, and said, "Excuse me, I need to borrow my husband for a moment." I led him to a quiet corner of the room. "We need to talk when we get home," I said. "About what?" "About the fact that you just called my business a hobby 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Sarah, don't be so sensitive. I was just." "You were just what, Marcus?" "Explaining to your colleagues that your wife's work isn't real? Making sure they know that you're still the important one in this marriage." "That's not what I was doing." "Then what were you doing?" He didn't have an answer. Or rather, he didn't have an answer he was willing to say out loud. We drove home in silence that night. I knew that the conversation we needed to have would probably be our last real conversation as husband and wife. But I also knew I couldn't keep living this way. The anniversary dinner was just the final public humiliation, the last straw that broke a back that was already bent to the breaking point. As I sit here now, in my home office in the house that's finally truly mine, I can see the whole trajectory clearly. Marcus's resentment didn't come out of nowhere. It built over years, fed by his own professional disappointments and his inability to accept that success can look different than what we expect. But here's what I've learned: someone else's insecurity is not your responsibility to manage. Someone else's wounded pride is not your burden to carry. And someone else's inability to celebrate your success is not a reason to stop succeeding. I loved Marcus. I probably always will, in some way. But I love myself more. And that, finally, is enough. The day the divorce was finalized, I got a text from Patricia, Marcus's mother. "Sarah, I hope you know how much we respected you. We just never realized how successful you really were. Marcus never told us." No, I thought, reading that message. He never did. But that's his loss, not mine. Because now I'm surrounded by people who see exactly how successful I am, who celebrate my achievements instead of diminishing them, who understand that my work is real and valuable and worth taking seriously. And you know what? That feels like the greatest success of all.